All right, everybody, get ready to dive in because today we are tackling Karl Marx.
Yeah, we're talking about Karl Marx.
Which, you've probably heard the name, right?
Definitely a familiar name.
But we're going to go deeper than just like, oh yeah, that guy. Communism, like.
Right, way deeper.
This is a deep dive.
That's right, that's what we do here.
So if you're ready to like have your mind blown about how much this one thinker's ideas still have ripples today, then buckle up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of incredible to think that here's somebody writing in the 19th century, and his analysis of power, labor, money, is still something that we're grappling with.
And still, like, hotly debated. It's not like oh, yeah, Marx, we figured that out.
No.
He's still someone that people are like, yes, absolutely, or no, completely wrong.
It's very much alive.
And the thing that blows my mind is this wasn't just some guy in an ivory tower just theorizing about stuff. He was really out there living it.
Yeah, he was very much committed to these ideas.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who got kicked out of countries for his beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, this wasn't about fame for Marx. It was really about understanding and maybe even changing the world.
Yeah, and when you think about the impact of his work, it's hard to argue that he didn't have some kind of an impact.
He really did.
So where do we even begin with a guy like Marx?
Well, it might surprise you to learn that he didn't actually start out as this radical revolutionary.
Okay.
He began studying law, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah.
Law. That seems like, I don't know, kind of a leap from, well, this.
It does and it doesn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because clearly this is someone who loved to debate. And law is all about, making an argument using evidence and all that. So,
Yeah.
But he gets captivated by philosophy and by history.
So he always had that desire to know, like, the why behind things.
My second
I
reload.
get that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I get it.
And it was a time of really intense intellectual ferment in Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, you can kind of compare it to like the 19th century version of the internet blowing up.
Yeah.
Right, like with all these new ideas.
Okay.
And he falls in with this group, the young Hegelians.
Oh, the young Hegelians.
Who were basically like the intellectual bad boys of their day.
Yeah, like the original posters who would get you to argue with them online.
Yes, exactly.
Just pushing those buttons.
That's a great comparison.
Makes you wonder what Marx's Twitter feed would have looked like.
I know, right?
Okay, I'm sorry, a little tangent.
No, it's good, it's good.
But yeah, so he's like really getting into this whole intellectual scene.
Yeah.
And then enters Friedrich Engels.
Of course.
Like the dynamic duo.
The partner in crime.
Yeah, like I always think of them as like, Batman and Robin, but for social critique.
That's a good one.
Like Marx is out there with the big ideas and Engels is like
Bankrolling the whole thing.
yeah, well, and also like,
Because he came from a wealthy family, he was able to provide that financial support so that Marx could focus on writing.
Yeah.
But also this really interesting perspective because Engels had that industrialist background.
Well, and you don't often see a wealthy industrialist kind of teaming up with a radical philosopher.
Yeah, not typically, no.
Yeah, it's one of those like, how did these two even meet?
Yeah, it's a fascinating partnership.
But they co-authored,
Communist Manifesto.
Communist Manifesto, which is like, if you're going to read one thing to understand Marx's critique of capitalism, that's the one.
Workers of the world, unite.
Yeah, even people who've never read it know that line.
That's true.
But even with Engels in his corner, even with the success of their work, Marx's life wasn't exactly, smooth sailing.
No, it was not an easy life.
He was basically like constantly on the move, in exile, because his ideas were just too radical for the powers that be.
Yeah, he was basically chased from country to country.
It's kind of wild.
It is wild. And what's even crazier is that he dies relatively poor, still working on this massive, massive critique of capitalism, das Kapital.
Wow, so he was committed.
Talk about dedication.
Yeah, like this wasn't just some, I don't know.
Side project.
Yeah, like this was his life's work and he believed in it, even when it meant sacrifice.
Absolutely.
It really makes you think about the weight of his ideas.
Yeah.
Like this wasn't just some academic exercise for him.
It wasn't. He was writing about the real struggles of everyday people.
It was about exposing what he saw as like deep flaws in the system itself.
And that's what we're going to get into next, the core of his work, his critique of capitalism.
All right, let's get down to the nitty-gritty here.
Let's do it.
What was Marx really saying about capitalism that ruffled so many feathers?
Oh, it's juicy. It's good stuff.
This is where it gets good.
This is it.
Yeah.
Juicy is a good word for it because we're getting into like the core of it, and it all kind of boils down to this idea of surplus value.
Okay, surplus value. Hit me with it. What are we talking about here?
All right, so imagine like you're a coder, right?
Okay.
You've been doing your app development stuff,
Yeah, I'm trying.
and you create this killer app. Everybody wants it. It's blowing up the App Store.
I'm like the next big thing. Yeah, everybody loves it.
You're raking it in.
Yeah, life is good.
Okay, but here's the thing. For every dollar your app is making, the App Store is taking a cut.
Okay.
That cuts that extra value that's generated off of your labor. That's what Marx is talking about when he says surplus value.
So even though I'm the one who stayed up all night, I poured my blood, sweat, and tears into this code. I'm the one who had the idea. I'm the creative genius behind it, but they're just profiting off of hosting it, essentially.
And this is Marx's point, is that this is like a fundamental feature of capitalism.
Yeah.
That you have the workers, whether they're coders, whether they're bakers, whether they're, construction workers, whatever it might be, they are creating the value, but they don't necessarily reap all the rewards of that labor.
Right.
That surplus value is being captured by someone else, typically the owner of, whatever the means of production are in that case.
It's like when you bake a really incredible cake for a bake sale and it sells for a ton of money, but you only get a slice and a pat on the back.
Exactly.
But the big sale organizer is like swimming in dough, literally.
And this is where, for Marx, this is where it starts to get, this is where the problems arise.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about the money. It's about the power dynamic that's at play here.
Right.
It's creating this system
Right.
where you have, and he uses these terms, the bourgeoisie, the owners, and the proletariat, the workers, and that division is going to lead to all sorts of problems.
And this is where I think we have to talk about alienation, right?
We did?
Like, that's a word that always comes up with Marx, I feel like.
It's a big one.
But I have to admit, I've never totally grasped, what does he actually mean by that?
So it's more than just, being bummed out at work or, not really liking your job.
Right.
Marx actually identifies four very specific types of alienation that workers experience.
Four
different types.
Okay. All right. Lay it on me.
Okay, so the first one is this idea of alienation from the product. So think back to your app.
Okay.
So in a way, you've poured yourself into this, but ultimately it's not really yours.
All right.
It's a commodity. It's something that's being produced for profit.
Right.
And you're kind of disconnected from it.
It's it makes me think about the difference between a woodworker who's making a table with their hands, who's choosing the wood and designing it, versus someone who's just assembling furniture from IKEA.
Exactly.
They're both technically making something.
Yeah.
But the connection to it is so different.
Completely different. And, the second type of alienation that Marx talks about is alienation from the process of work.
Okay.
So instead of finding work, meaningful or engaging or fulfilling in some way, it becomes this kind of repetitive, often very monotonous, almost dehumanizing in a way.
Yeah. You're just a cog in a machine.
Exactly. You're not really using, your full creative potential.
And we've all had those jobs
Oh, tell me about it.
where you're just staring at the clock,
Yeah.
just waiting for it to be over.
And then the third type is alienation from other workers. And this one's really interesting because this is kind of a sneaky one, where capitalism sort of pits us against each other, right?
Right.
We're competing for jobs, we're competing for promotions, we're competing for just to be seen and recognized.
That's that whole dog-eat-dog world.
That's exactly it.
But in the office.
And then finally, Marx talks about this idea of alienation from our species being, which I know sounds a little...
Yeah, species being, that's a new one.
It's a little heady, but it's actually a really fascinating concept.
Right, break it down for me.
Okay, so Marx believed that human beings are, by nature, creative beings.
Okay.
We find meaning, we find purpose in transforming the world around us through our work.
Okay.
But under capitalism, he argues that often we're reduced to working just for a paycheck, not for sort of the intrinsic satisfaction of creating something or expressing ourselves.
So it's not just feeling alienated at work, it's feeling alienated from a fundamental part of yourself almost.
Exactly. And so it all ties back to this analysis of how capitalism functions, how it shapes our lives, how it shapes our relationships.
It's deep.
It's deep stuff. And this is just the tip of the iceberg because we haven't even gotten to his ideas about history and where he sees society going.
Okay, so we've covered alienation, but what about this whole historical materialism thing?
Oh, yeah.
It always sounded kind of intimidating to me, I need a PhD to understand it. Don't worry, it sounds way more complicated than it needs to be. You don't need a PhD.
Yeah.
It's really just Marx's way of explaining how he saw history, like, unfolding.
Yeah, his big theory of history.
Yeah.
And the basic idea is that the way we produce things, our economic system,
Okay.
is really the foundation for
Huh.
everything else.
Right.
Our laws, our culture, our
Right.
beliefs, even
Oh,
it
wow.
all comes back to
Yeah.
how we make and distribute stuff.
So it's not just that iPhones are determining our laws now.
Well, I mean, there's something to be said for that,
Right.
but it's more
Yeah,
like
sure.
the whole system, right?
Yeah.
Of how we make iPhones, how we sell iPhones, how we buy iPhones. Like, all of that is what's actually shaping the world around us.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, it's like the larger system.
The whole thing, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so Marx, he kind of breaks history down into these different stages,
Yeah.
and each stage has its own mode of production.
Okay.
So you start out with like early hunter-gatherer societies, what he called primitive communism.
Okay.
You've got slave societies, feudalism, and now,
The big one.
the big one,
Right.
capitalism.
Right. And each of these has like its own.
Its own issues, its own internal tensions
Right. So
that
like
eventually lead to its downfall.
so every system has like an expiration date, basically.
That was Marx's view, yeah.
Okay, so where does that leave capitalism?
Well, Marx believed that capitalism, even though it's capable of incredible innovation, incredible progress,
Right.
he saw it as inherently unstable.
Okay.
He thought it was prone to crises, and ultimately he believed that it was destined to be replaced.
Because
Remember that idea of surplus value we were talking about?
yes.
That constant drive for profit, for more, more, more?
Right.
Marx believed that that would eventually lead to the whole thing kind of collapsing under its own weight.
So it's like a game of Jenga.
Okay, I'll get.
Like we keep pulling blocks out, we keep stacking them higher.
Yeah,
But eventually the whole thing's just gonna
they're gonna fall.
and then someone's gonna yell Jenga really loud.
Right.
And then what happens after capitalism?
Well, Marx, he envisioned something different than just like a big, collapse, a big crash.
Yeah.
He believed that this process, these internal contradictions,
Right.
this exploitation of workers, the pursuit of profit above all else,
Mm-hmm.
would eventually lead to what he called a proletarian revolution.
Okay, proletarian revolution. That has a good, I don't know, sounds very dramatic.
It's a very evocative term.
But what does it actually mean?
So, in a nutshell,
Yeah.
Marx believed that the working class, the proletariat,
Okay.
the ones who are actually, doing the work, creating the value,
Right.
would eventually rise up. They would overthrow the capitalist class, the bourgeoisie,
Right.
and they would establish a more equitable system
Okay.
where the means of production are owned collectively.
So instead of, the few profiting off the labor of the many,
Exactly.
it's more about sharing that wealth and creating a more just system.
That was the idea.
I can see how that would be appealing.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, Marx's ideas have resonated with people all over the world.
Right.
I mean, his work has inspired revolutions,
Oh, yeah.
social movements, countless works of art and literature.
Right, but it's not like everybody agrees with this, right?
Of course not. And there are,
I feel like for every person who's like, Marx, what a visionary, there's someone who's like, get out of here.
yeah, and there are valid criticisms of his work.
Okay.
Some people argue that he underestimated capitalism's ability to adapt,
To change.
Yeah, to change.
Okay.
Think about things like labor unions,
Right.
worker protections, social welfare programs.
Right.
These are all things that have helped to address some of the, the worst excesses of capitalism.
So it's not like a black and white,
No.
good or bad kind of thing.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
Like most things in life, it's complicated.
Isn't it always?
Right.
Why does it have to be so complicated?
But that's why I think, even if you don't agree with everything Marx said,
Right.
his work is still relevant today
Okay.
because it forces us to ask these really tough questions
Yeah.
about power, about inequality,
Right.
and about, what kind of world we want to live in.
He's like that friend that even if you don't agree with their conclusions,
Right.
they make you think.
They make you see things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's really valuable.
And that's what the deep dive is all about.
That's what we're here for.
So next time you hear the name Karl Marx,
Yeah.
don't just think about those dusty old textbooks.
Right. It's not just about, some old dead guy with a beard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about the stuff that's still going on today.
The struggle for economic justice.
The power dynamics, even just in our own lives.
Absolutely.
And maybe, just ask yourself, what would Marx say?
What would Marx say? That's a good question.
It's a question for the ages.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Karl Marx.
Always a pleasure.